Hello, everyone. My name is Liz Voda. I am the Instruction and Outreach Librarian at the University of Michigan Flint Thompson Library, and I'm welcoming you to this iteration of Citation Station webinar series. And today we're going to cover an introduction to MLA. So this session was going to be focused on the citation styles in MLA. I'm not going to be able to get into any formatting or grammar guidelines for like the rest of the paper or project, but we will get pretty in-depth with the actual anatomy of a citation. And that's going to cover in-text citations as well as reference entries, works cited list, and then we'll actually do some hands-on kind of generating of a citation, and then finally leave you all with some resources to help in future projects as well. So the MLA is from the Modern Language Association of America. It was initially created in like the 1950s, but currently they are using the 9th edition, which was published in 2021. Citations, they're basically just how you identify the original source of an idea or phrase that you are using or referencing in a paper or project that you're working on, and they're how you communicate and be transparent about where that source of information is coming from. They're made up of two parts, both an in-text citation and then entries into a works cited list. And the MLA handbook has several sections that will kind of guide you on this. And there is some helpful content on their website, but the manual is definitely the best place to go look for additional help. So we're going to start with in-text citations because those are a little bit simpler to wrap your head around sometimes. There's not as much formatting and things that are going to be that you'll see in that full entry in a works cited list. So MLA is an author page citation system, which means you're going to use the author's name as well as the page number in those citations in order to kind of point back to that full works cited list. So in-text citations can either be parenthetical, so this is when you're not using the author's name as part of the sentence, you're going to include in parentheses the author's name and then the page number, no other punctuation or notation, just name and page number in those parentheses. And then if you use it in prose, or sometimes it's called a narrative citation, you're going to use those when you actually use the creator's name as part of your sentence. So if I was going to use this sentence, for example, according to Weaver being the author's name, the citing source is important. And if I'm quoting that or paraphrasing that, I'm going to put that page number in parentheses at the end of the sentence. So those in-text citations need to be pretty much in the same sentence as wherever that direct quotation or paraphrase is coming from. But the format is pretty much standard across different types of sources. So whether it's text or audio visual, you're always going to have that author. And typically a page number, though for some types of sources, it may actually be like a timestamp or a paragraph number. And there's again some extra guidance in the manual there as well. And one note about all of this is that all of the information that I'm taking from the manual, I am going to be highlighting it in this little purple box up here at the top of the screen, as well as putting in brackets kind of anywhere in the slides, giving you a direct location about where to find this information in the manual. So a little bit more on in-text citations. They could have multiple authors in a citation or for a source, right? So you list up to 2 authors' names, but for 3 or more authors, you actually have the ability to just use the first author's name, add in the et al., which stands for all others, and then the page number there. Sometimes you might have a group who's an author. So again, this is going to be something like a government organization or nonprofit, something like that. Often they will publish something and they won't necessarily have like an actual person writing it like on a website a lot of the time. With MLA, you're going to try to shorten it to the shortest noun phrase, right? So you're going to try to find that first noun, and that's what you'd shorten it down to. So American Historical Association is that noun, right? So that is why you have you have to have that all three words there and end with association. For National Endowment for the Arts, with in-text citations, you're going to go to that first noun, endowment, right? National is an adjective, endowment is a noun, so it's going to be National Endowment. You are also going to have, you can also have multiple sources within one set of parentheses. Often when you are summarizing kind of a point that's made across multiple sources, you are going to separate those by a semicolon, and the order in which these come is really up to you. If you want to go alphabetical, that's fine. If you want to kind of put a source that is more important to you towards the front or has more information or something, you could do that as well. The actual like order within this in-text citation doesn't matter as much. It's kind of up to you as how you want to organize it. All right, so in-text citations, fairly simple. Entries in a works cited list, this is where MLA gets a little bit more complicated. So there are three kind of main core elements that are made up. And I know there's 9 listed here, but if you look at the actual diagram that I took from the MLA site here, you'll notice that it kind of separates out author and then the title of the source. And then it groups together basically from 3 on down to 9 into what's called a container. We'll get into what a container is in a second, but you're definitely going to have that author, that title, and then the different attributes that make up that container. What's the punctuation in MLA is pretty simple and actually pretty similar to APA, which we did a webinar on a little bit earlier this week. But periods are going to kind of put a stop on behind those core elements or those kind of areas of that entry. So author, period, title of source, period, and then you have a period at the end of the container. But then within that container, commas are going to kind of separate the different parts. So between title of container and contributor, contributor and version, version and number, so on and so forth. Okay. And again, it's just the periods are there just kind of like give visual clues as to like, this is the end of the author statement. This is the end of that title, to help your reader kind of understand the citation a little bit. So an author is the primary creator of work, and this could be an individual person, multiple people, or an organization like we talked about. With MLA, with only one author, you're going to list that author's name with the last name or the surname first, comma, followed by their spelled out first name, and then if they have a second initial or multiple initials, you put that there, okay? With 2 authors, you're going to use the same notation for that first author, so last name, comma, first name spelled out, and then you're going to include an and then you actually put the second author's name in the order in which you would normally find it. So it would be first name, middle initial, last name for a Western author. For a non-Western author, so sometimes a lot of Chinese researchers or Chinese scholars, they'll actually put their family name first, followed by their given name, and that's okay to hold that there as well. Okay. For 3 or more authors, it gets a little bit easier, right? MLA, unlike a lot of other citation styles, they say you really just need that first name, that first author's name, and then you can include an et al. At the end there to indicate that there are more people included in this. And it doesn't matter if it's 3, 4, 20, doesn't matter, okay? For group authors, you're going to omit any kind of initial articles, so the, and you're going to treat it as a last name when you alphabetize. And if there is a group author, you can omit this. If the publisher and the author are the same, you can actually omit the author and just start with the title. We'll give some ideas and like examples of this a little bit later on, I believe. And then again, there's a lot of there's additional rules to look at with authors, like someone without a surname, for someone who has a name change, so someone who's transgender, for example, people who are going by like an online handle or a pseudonym, other things about key contributors to a work. So there's definitely a lot of other types of rules with this author here that, again, definitely check out these in the manual. So the second element in a reference entry here is the title of the source. And this is the title of the work that you are actually citing. And they want you to be as specific as possible with this. So you're going to use the title of an article rather than the title of a journal. You're going to use the title of an essay in an edited book, for example, or, an episode title rather than like the title of a podcast or a TV series. Okay. For the format, you're going to copy any capitalization and punctuation from the source. If it is kind of a standalone work, so like a novel, or you're citing an entire book essay, or it's an entire website or entire poem or something like that, you're actually going to italicize the work. Okay. If that work is kind of part of a larger work, so it is a short story, it is a poem in a collection of poems, it is an article in a journal or an article in a newspaper, you're going to put quotation marks around that source title. So if you look at the examples, the first one we have, Hilary Mantel, who's the author of a novel called Wolf Hall. Okay. And the second one, we have Edgar Allan Poe as the author, and then his story is called The Mask of the Red Death, and that short story is included in, a complete works of Edgar Allan Poe. Okay, so that's the kind of difference that you'll see between those two different types of titles. All right, so let's talk about a container. So author and title, those are always kind of separated out. A container it has all of the other information that you will need to create these citations. Excuse me. So a container is, the work that contains another work. So thus it's a container. Works can have more than one container, or they could be, standalone or kind of self-contained. So like the novel example that we just had from Hilary Mantel. So types of containers that MLA kind of lists out: journal, magazine, newspaper, these contain articles, okay? An anthology or like a collection of essays or an edited book often contain an essay, a poem, or a short story. TV series, podcasts, radio programs, you have an episode. You have websites like Facebook, and there's definitely a lot more to this table that I adapted from the MLA handbook. But like some social media posts where you have additional posts or comments kind of on those things, the website is the container, but the post is there. And then in a database like JSTOR, JSTOR is a database that contains journals, right? So there's going to be some different levels, and you have more than one container in a citation, and we'll definitely see examples of what this looks a little bit later on. All right, so let's talk about the kind of components of that container, what those components look like in a reference here. So the title of the container, this is again the title of the journal, the title of that anthology, the title of the website. Hopefully it's going to be really prominently displayed, and there are actually some really good diagrams and kind of examples of where to look in the MLA handbook, and also on their website as well. They will there's definitely additional help there, kind of help you figure out where titles might be on different types of sources. But with formatting, you're going to copy capitalization and punctuation from a source. And again, if you have, because this is typically going to, if the container has its own title, typically the title of the source is going to be in quotation marks like you see on the examples here. So you're going to, again, italicize it and followed by that comma. So the examples, again, we have that one we saw just now, The Masque of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe, which Masque of the Red Death, title, the source. Title, the container, is the completed works of Edgar Allan Poe, okay? So that's the initial anthology. But then in that same reference, you also see that HathiTrust Digital Library is also a secondary container, okay? Which means that this source was found in HathiTrust, and then they found the completed works, and then they went to the Red Death, right? So, or the Masque of the Red Death. So again, there's two containers that hold this story. A little bit different is actually I cited a song by Snail Mail, right? So the song is Thinning. The album is Habit. So, and that, or the title of the album is Habit. So that's the container of this particular song. All right. So contributors are people who, or groups or even organizations who contribute to a work, but they're not their primary creator. Okay, so some common examples of contributors are things like editors, translators, directors, narrators. And if you guys notice, MLA, again, was developed by the Modern Language Association, so a lot of the examples that they give are definitely geared towards literature and the arts, which is, because the people who are primarily using MLA are focused on those disciplines. So if you are citing things that are, being published in scientific scholarly journals, right? Things that are coming from natural physical health sciences, you probably actually won't see a lot of contributors in that aspect. So it'll just, again, depend on the type of source or the sources that you're using. How you format it, you're going to list out the person or organization's name completely, capitalize it, all that good stuff. You're also going to add kind of a describing role. So what did they do to this source? Did they adapt it? Did they illustrate it? Did they translate it, right? It also comes, so this label often comes before the name in a container. And then you're going to use those lowercase to write it out, unless it's kind of the first word after a period. So in the example down below, Beowulf, epic, pre-medieval saga, right? We don't know who wrote it exactly. We don't have anybody who's attributed to it. So there is no author there. But we do have the text, and we know that it was translated by, in this case, Alan Sullivan, and because translated by is following that initial period after Beowulf is capitalized, okay? Or it's translated by Alan Sullivan and Timothy Murphy. And then you'll see that it was also additionally edited by Sarah Anderson, okay? So those are the two contributor kind of notations in this particular reference example. All right, so the next bit that you're going to add on here is a version. And this is something that you might not actually use all that often. Again, it kind of depends on the type of source that you're using. But you should look for anything that kind of indicates that there's that this work has been released in more than one way or more than one form. So a lot of the times you'll see things like second edition, revised edition, the example down below with the authorized King James Version, right? There's multiple editions of the Bible. So you want to be specific about which one you're using. Typically you're going to, with the formatting, you're going to leave it as lowercase, again, unless it is the first word after a period, or if it's a proper noun. So authorized King James Version, that is the proper noun of that version. You'll actually abbreviate edition down to ed period, and there are also going to see other abbreviations and things like how to do second, third, fourth, editions. All of those are going to be listed in the handbook as well. The next thing you're going to do is add in is a number, and again, sometimes there's oftentimes you won't necessarily need a number. So, for example, most books don't have a number, but you will see them in things like journal articles, websites, or television shows, podcasts, that kind of thing. So common ones that you are going to see are volume, issue, season, episode. You're typically going to use lowercase, again, unless it is the first word after a period or proper noun. Probably won't be in most cases. You're going to translate anything into Arabic numerals. So instead of writing out 64 or using Roman numerals like, VI or anything like that, you're going to actually use Arabic numerals for 64 and number 1. And you'll use the abbreviations VOL period for volume and NO period for number, for an issue number. So the examples we have, the first one is a journal article from Ann Goldman, and it's coming from the 64th volume, issue number 1 of the Georgia Review. Okay. In the second example here, this is citing an episode of television. Hush is the episode from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and you'll see that it is season 4, episode 10. Okay, so you will actually write out season and episode there, but for volume and issue number, because you see them so often, and because most people, or at least most academics, will kind of know that volume, what VOL and NO period mean, you'll be able to shorten those up. The publisher is basically the kind of entity that is responsible for producing the work and making it available to the public. So not actually the kind of creator who went in and wrote the whole thing, but they're the ones who edit it and make it look good and include it in a journal or include it on in another kind of work or something, right? The people who actually put it onto television and broadcast it. So again, it could be a book publisher, governmental department, television or film studio, could be a nonprofit organization. One thing to note is that sometimes the publisher might be a website, but there are going to be different types of websites and databases that you should really treat as containers, not publishers. And the way you can kind of think about this is think about YouTube. So YouTube doesn't actually create the vast majority of the content that's on its site, right? Anybody can upload something to YouTube. You create an account, you post a video. So you're the creator of that account, but YouTube didn't actually help with the production except for having that site available to you, right? So they're not technically a publisher. They are the site that kind of contains your work. Similarly with JSTOR and other types of academic databases, like EBSCOhost or ProQuest or anything like that, they're a company that, again, they're not responsible for editing the journal. They're not responsible for kind of putting it out there. Journals are going to contract with them to say, hey, we'd like you to, include this journal in your publication or in your database, and then put it out for libraries. Okay, so they're kind of holding on to, they're not responsible for the actual creation. They're just kind of, a container, for that site. So it can be a little bit tricky to figure out, but hopefully with more practice, you'll be able to kind of distinguish between what's going on. So formatting a publisher, capitalize it like a proper noun. You're going to omit any kind of notices about a legal corporate entity. So no company, no limited, no Inc., for example. And this is a new thing or newer thing with MLA is that you're going to omit the city of publication with some exception. So most of the time we don't need to know that we'll pick on Hachette. We don't need to know that Hachette Publishing Group has its offices in New York. Lots of publishing companies do, okay? Especially big names like that. Or, for example, there's quite a few university presses that are based on, so Michigan University of Michigan Press, right? It's in Michigan. We don't need to duplicate that publication. There might be some there for smaller presses or for older sources. You might actually want to include it. But again, check the manual for those kind of exceptions. And so in our examples, Modern Language Association America is the person who published this MLA style sheet back in 1962. And then in the second example from Rampersand, Oxford University Press is the publisher of his book, The Life of Langston Hughes. Okay. And again, that abbreviation of UP for University Press that is standard in MLA. And again, there's definitely some other formatting rules that you should look up when it comes to the publisher. Okay. I know there's lots of stuff in a container, but we're getting there. So publication date, this is, again, when the source was published or aired. Oftentimes looking for a copyright symbol in a database or in a book is going to give you that date that you need. And you are going to try to use the most specific date you can find. So if it is an article from like a newspaper, you're going to want to use the day that publication came out, okay? If it's a magazine or journal that comes out monthly, you're going to want to include that month and the year, okay? In case it has in the format that you're going to want to use is day, month, year. So in that second example from Stephen Merrill, you'll see that this particular post on Edutopia was published on March 19th of 2020, so 19 March 2020. And then you'll notice that in the Goldman article that it is spring 2010. So that's when it was put out, okay? And there are going to be some standard abbreviations that you're going to want to use for this, specifically about like months, or how to spell the months in a citation like this. All right. Location the type of location that you need to include in a citation is going to kind of depend on the format of the work that you're working with, right? Telling someone to go find a physical book or journal article is a little bit different than, telling them to go find a website, right? So this is just a small sample or the table here is a small sample of something I adapted from, again, the handbook. So what the location refers to is not necessarily like a physical place, right? We got rid of that statement with the publisher. You don't need to like physically tell me where you found this book or these pages or this article. You need to tell me kind of the place within the work. So is it from a specific page range? Is it, where in the book is it from? If it's an online work, can you give me a permanent link or a DOI link to it as well? So we want to try to be specific about where we're finding this information within the source itself. For formatting, you're using Arabic numeral or numeric symbols that can be Arabic, or if they are, Roman numerals, or have like an A1 through A3, for example, you're going to follow whatever the source has, and you're going to try to be inclusive with those page numbers. So it's going to be 1 through 7, or if there's some other formatting things that, again, check the manual. And you are going to include P period for if it's just a single page, or double P period if it goes over multiple pages, okay? It is a good rule of thumb to include a DOI or a permalink whenever possible, okay? Because, again, you're trying to be transparent. You want your readers, your audience, to get to that information as quickly and as easily as possible. And there's a lot of specific URL formatting that MLA goes into to try to get you to that, the most succinct and readable citation. So definitely check the manual for that. All right, so the date was the location was the last bit of that container, okay? Except sometimes you need some supplemental elements for an entry, okay? So typically they're going to come in two places, right after the title of the source or kind of at the very end of an entry, okay? So the supplemental elements that come after a title of a source, sometimes there's going to be editors of a particular story, or maybe a translator of a particular short story or an essay or something. So they're going to be kind of tied to that initial source. Things like an original publication date of the source. So again, if like a poem first appeared online and then was, published later on, you might want to put that there. Another thing you might want to include after a source is like a specific area, or if the source's title is kind of tied to a specific area of a book, like it's the foreword of the book, or if it's an afterword or something like that. Again, you'll see probably a lot of that more with literary sources, not so much if you're citing journals or websites or something like that. At the things that the supplemental elements that you'll find at the end of an entry are going to be things like the date you accessed something. So especially if it's an online work with no publication date, you're going to want to say, oh, I went to this website at this time to get this information. Okay. Sometimes you'll need to include like less common types of publications. So is it a transcript? Is it a lecture? Is it a preprint, right? And other things like if you're citing a video, but you also are citing that transcript, you're going to kind of want to put that there. For dissertations, you're going to want to include kind of the conferring institution. So if you're citing a dissertation or thesis that one of our graduate students put forth, you're going to actually include University of Michigan Flint at the end of that dissertation. And then the last thing, like sometimes if you're citing an article or something that's coming from like a recurring column, or if it's a book that's in a multi-volume work, or it's a book in a series or something, you might want to put the title of that series, the title of that column, something like that at the very end. Again, you'll see this a lot more with like the book series and like dissertations and stuff. Those are really specific ones. The date of access is probably the one that you're going to use the most, the supplemental element that you'll use the most, just because of how often you're citing online sources at this point. All right. And then just a note on punctuation here. Again, that period is going to separate any core or supplemental elements, and then commas you're going to separate parts of the container. Okay. And this cute little diagram from the MLA website gives you an idea of like what this kind of looks like. All right. So a note on missing information, because a lot of the time you will have missing information, right? It's like, especially with how specific the MLA style kind of gets. So it says, omit any element that does not apply to the work except for title of the source. Okay. If no title is given, you're going to use your own description of work as the title. So this is an example of that journal article by Ann Goldman. And you'll notice that there is no contributor, there's no version, there's no publisher, right? Because with journal articles, typically are things that are kind of going on and on and on. We don't technically care who publishes it, at least in an MLA citation, because you're more interested in like finding the title of that title of the journal there. So, there's no contributor, there's no other person who's like editing it that really needs to be, accredited. There's no additional version. So we just leave those blank. We just skip those over. We don't mention them at all. And we just put everything that we need to in there. Okay. All right. So, MLA has almost 200 different examples of what works cited entries should look like. In Appendix 2 of the handbook, this was actually probably the biggest addition to this 9th edition. The 8th was very stripped down. It didn't have a lot of examples. And when the 9th came out, I, along with a lot of people, breathed a sigh of relief that they really gave some specific examples of what this looks like. Okay. The other thing that you might want to go to is there is this MLA style center online, and they do have some citations by format. So when you go to MLA style, up at the very top here under citing sources, you can actually get to citations by format. There's also this interactive practice template that we're going to look at in a little bit, and there is a quick guide online. But you will see, there's things like books, online works, movies version, images, and you can go to examples, but there are not as many as are in the manual. So I would definitely suggest going to that manual if you want to find more kind of examples. And speaking of examples, we're going to try it together. We're going to try to pull information from these sources kind of together. So let me pull up the interactive style template here. Okay, so this is what this is, again, from the MLA site. It's linked up at the top under citing your sources here. And what it does is it actually like lets you kind of build these together. And again, you'll see this is where I got that cute little elements, or that cute little diagram. Okay, we're going to try two different sources. And first one, we're going to actually use a, hold on a second. Make sure that this is sized correctly here. Okay, so the first one we're going to use is a journal article that we found through the library site. So the article is entitled Medical Research, Are Esports Really Sports? And you'll see that up at the top here, there's a lot of information about this particular article. Okay, it has, hopefully those are all of the authors listed, because there's quite a few. You'll see that it is coming from a publication called Clinics. It has its date, its volume number, and then it actually has a page number and an article number which match, which makes me kind of question what's going on here and what that might be. Okay. Another thing to note is that you actually down below see that you can get to this article in a couple of different ways. So depending on which database you go through, you're going to need to actually kind of spell that out in that reference. Okay. And so in order to make sure that this is good, there's a couple things we can do. A lot of our databases are actually going to try to generate the citation style here. And actually this is the 8th. We might actually make sure that we can get the 9th edition on here instead of the 8th. But it does a fairly decent job, at least right now that we know of, right? So it gives you just that first author with the et al. It has, the title of the source in quotation marks, and then it has, Clinics Sao Paulo, Brazil, which we maybe don't need that Sao Paulo, Brazil, right? And then I'd also want to see if there's why they're using this as the page number instead of actual pages. So we would definitely need to kind of investigate this a little bit more. So let's actually go into Science Direct and take a look at the full text of this article. Okay. All right, so we get a little bit more information here. We definitely see that it's volume 76, that it's January through December of 2023. So again, here with that, with this particular generated citation, it doesn't give us those dates. So we probably actually do want to actually put those dates in there. And I'm not seeing anything, and there's still that weird page number, right? So in this case, I'm going to want to download the full PDF to see kind of what's going on here. Give us a second. All right. Okay. All right. So we can definitely see that this is from Clinics. It's the official scientific journal of a hospital, probably from University of Sao Paulo, Brazil. So we probably actually do want to keep that there. We'll see that this is comments. So this is, an editorial basically from this particular journal. And you'll notice that there actually isn't a page number here, right? So it's Clinic 78, 2023. And it lists an article number, not necessarily a page number. Though there's a page 1 and let's see, on page 2, there's a page 2, but it doesn't actually list out page 1. So maybe this particular page number is kind of actually how we want to look at it. We could actually go back to Elsevier here and download the full issue if we wanted to really be sure, okay? So generating or creating these citations does take a little bit of time and practice. As you get used to it, you'll be able to kind of see stuff, but let's actually kind of look here and add in stuff. So this first author here, we've got his name or their name there. And remember with MLA, we're going to need to put the family name, the surname first, and then we can spell out that. Because there's more than one author, we're going to include that et al. There. And you can see in the kind of right side of the screen that it's actually kind of building out the citation as we want. Okay, here we're going to copy the title of the source, which is an article, and we want to keep the capitalization and the punctuation and everything the same. Now, this is a fun article because obviously I don't know if it's fun or not, but the title is a little bit fun because it has a question mark at the end. Now, if a source title ends in some sort of punctuation, you're not going to put a period after that. Hopefully the generator here will do that, but you don't necessarily have you don't have to duplicate publication or add additional publication if there's end punctuation in a title. Okay. Now, title of the container. Again, we have clinics up here, and we're going to definitely put that. I'm guessing the reason they put clinics with the Sao Paulo is to because clinics is a very generic word. Like there could be more than one publication with clinics. So in this case, I would kind of make sure that I would want to go back and make sure that the Sao Paulo, Brazil, or we have some sort of listing of the medical institution that it's coming from, just to kind of differentiate from any other clinics that are out there. So let me actually, how do they do this? Because I don't know the fun little accent on that page. Here we go. Apologies. All right. So we're again going to kind of put that there just to make sure that it's really specific. Then contributors. So typically with journals, they don't list out who any particular editor is or anything like that. So we don't need to worry. I wouldn't worry about the contributor. Version, again, research articles typically don't have it. But number here, this is where we're going to need to have that included. So we definitely know that this is volume 78. And so we're going to put that volume 78 there. Now this is where I would want to be sure to look to see and maybe download that full issue, because this has that article number instead of page numbers. We might want to actually look to see how it's kind of included in that full issue. And so here's though I'm not going to right now because it's 100 PDFs. So I would still probably use that, or use that article number as kind of not an issue number. I'm trying to think about that. See, citations, so much fun. But then definitely having this December or January through December option here with the publication date. And if I'm not mistaken, let me double check appendix 1 here. It definitely, because appendix 1 tells you how to, in the manual, tells you how to, with some punctuation and some really common abbreviations, like months. So it actually wants us to do Jan period, December period, 2023. And then just for the sake, we're going to put that page number, or that article number here, and assume that's there. Okay. The other thing is, because we have, because we're getting this from Science Direct, we're going to need a supplemental, or we're actually going to need to add another container. Okay. So in this case, the title of the container is going to be the database in which we got this. So this is coming from a database called Science Direct. Okay. Science Direct. And then with databases, those kind of things, we don't need a contributor, version number, publisher, even publication date, but we do need another location. And in this example, we're going to grab this DOI down here and put that in as the location. Okay. So again, up here in the kind of upper right corner of this interactive practice template, it tries to give you everything that you want. Now, are there issues with this? Yes, you can't just copy and paste directly from here because a lot of that punctuation is missing. So you'd actually need to go in and kind of add in the commas and other things that you need to kind of make this look more correct. So adding in those periods and like space, you're going to probably want to add in spaces as well to make sure that everything's good. But it at least gives you an idea of kind of what your citation should look like. Okay. Yeah. So I like the interactive practice template just to give you some practice with it, but it's not necessarily the easiest thing to use. But okay, let's try it with another source now that we've gotten our feet under us a little bit. So I've got this other article here, and we're going to reset our practice template just so that we've got it completely clean. All right, now this is a web page, okay? So we're going to look for an author first, we're going to look for the title of the source, and then we're going to kind of get into the other issues that, or the other types of things that we need in that, in the container. So right off the bat, I'm not seeing an individual author up here at the top near the title or the date, which is often where I would look for it in on a website like this. Another place it might be on pages is, maybe down past this initial image, or at the very bottom of the page. Sometimes there's a person here, but I'm not seeing any of that. I am just seeing the Mayo Clinic, right? So we're actually going to use Mayo Clinic as the author here. Okay, now, and again, put a period at the end so that we've got that there. All right, so the title of the source. Now, there's a couple of different places that the title might be. One of the things that I like to do on websites is actually look at the very tip top here under and kind of look at the tab of the web page, because a lot of the times if the website is kind of built correctly, it will actually give you the title in the tab there. Okay, so this is the rise of esports caring for gamers. So, and if you'll notice, like even in the URL at the top, you're going to see that it's the Mayo Clinic. It's going to kind of go under a couple of different areas. So for medical professionals, physical medicine, rehabilitation, news, and then it gets to this really long string that actually talks about the title a little bit more. So instead of doing like medical professionals, physical, medical, or medicine, rehabilitation, I'm actually going to use, the rise of esports caring for gamers. Okay. So this is again the title of the source. I'm going to put a period after that and space it out. Now we get down to the container. Okay. Let's get some of the easier stuff out first. So we can definitely see that here is the date that we need. It's not in its correct format. Anybody see what we should do to make this date formatted correctly? Definitely need to put a period at the end. Okay. And then the other thing that MLA wants us to do is it actually wants us to put the day before the month. And this is kind of a holdover from, it's basically just to make clear like what the day is versus what the year is. So it's 11th of October 2022. Okay. With the location, again, we're looking for a URL. Since this is a website, this is how we found it, we can definitely copy the URL from the very top, okay? And then we need to find some sort of like title of the container, the contributor, version, that kind of thing, okay? So in this case, there is no other kind of contributor except for the Mayo Clinic, right? So there's nothing here that we really kind of like that we would add on as the title of the container, right? Because the title of the container, the Mayo Clinic, is the same as the title of like the title of the website is coming from the Mayo Clinic, right? Which is also the author. So in this case, let me just double check to make sure that I am going to, yeah. So what we actually are going to want to do here is not have an author. So a lot of websites aren't going to have an author, especially if the organization that's putting out the website is the person, or they're the one who are primarily responsible for this. So we're actually going to take author out of here and put that in the title of the container, kind of an act as that publisher. And this is coming from, again, if you guys want to actually double check me and see what's going on, this is from Appendix 2 in the MLA handbook, and it's under the section websites, and I'm looking at, where'd it go? Site written and published by an organization, okay? So, and if you look at it, it's going to be, the title of the source, which in this case, we're going to want to italicize once we get it into a better format. Then it has, the title of the container, or it could actually also be the publisher, kind of depends. But they all come before that date of publication, as well as the link, the link, okay? So MLA sometimes is a little bit tricky to get these citations into the format that they are best suited for, okay? All right. Questions about this right now? We still got a little bit left of our lovely site here. Okay. All right. So again, I'm watching the chat. Put stuff in there if you want it. But yes. Okay. So let's talk about works cited list really quickly. This is listed out in chapter 1.6 or section 1.6 of the manual. So you're going to put it at the end of the paper. It doesn't necessarily have to go on a new page. I typically like to put it on a new page just so that's kind of clear. You're going to center the heading works cited on that page. The order of citations is by author's names. And if there is no author, you're going to use the title as that first alphabetical entry. So if you think about the page from Mayo Clinic, that's what we're going to do. You're going to format with a hanging indent, meaning that the second, third, and possibly fourth or more lines are indented with about a half an inch. And then you're going to have double spacing both within and between the entries. So each line, there's a space in between each line. And it doesn't matter if it's between, like, it's going to be all here. So this is what a works cited entry looks like. Again, works cited should be kind of centered over it, but for the sake of the slides, I did it this way. You'll notice that it is in alphabetical order here. So Dershowitz, Goldman, Mantell, Merrill. All right. You'll see that we have a couple of different options here, different types of sources. And just to kind of give you a clear idea about what's coming and like where all these different elements are, all of the author elements are in yellow. And then you've got the title of the source in green. The first container is going to be in blue. And then if there's a second container, it's in that kind of pinkish color. Okay, so the only one that has a secondary container is that Goldman and option there. All right. Questions at all? I know this is a lot of information, and there's a lot of MLA is sometimes not overly complicated, but they're very the formatting is very kind of strict in a lot of ways. So Okay. Not seeing anything. I will leave you with some help here. Obviously, the MLA handbook is the best source. It's the most in-depth and detailed. So if you are going to be using it quite a bit, I would suggest buying it. We do have a copy in the library. There is no online version of the full handbook. At least that's not like a reasonably priced one. I will actually know there is one for personal use. I'm sorry, you could buy an e-version of this. They won't license it to libraries, unfortunately. There is that MLA style site, which, you might want to look at. It doesn't have as much, there you go. It doesn't have as much help as I would like, but under citing sources, that is where you're going to see some of the parts that I actually showed you today. The other thing, the other place that you might want to go to is on the library website. We have this guide that's called for citation tools, and it is linked under research help. Let me make this a little bigger here. It's linked under research help from our website. So here it is, but it has help with things like citation generators, EndNote, and Zotero, the two that we support in the library. It also has help tutorials on all of those, but it also has the style guides here. So MLA is linked here. We have the handbook there. It has a link to the MLA Style Center. And then, Purdue OWL is one of those that a lot of people go to for additional kind of help and citation or help with citations. Again, I personally like going directly to the source, so using the handbook or using that style center as much as possible, but Purdue does a fairly decent job. Okay, and of course, if you need any help from me, my contact information is there. Thank you for watching.
Thank you for watching this recorded webinar. Find upcoming webinars to register for at libcal.umflint.edu.